Ashley Banfield here, and this is Rising Tide, the place where I bring some of the greatest mentor minds to you. If you care about your craft and you want to be better at what you do, I want to help you with that. You know, it's easy to assume that you need an Ivy League education to really make it big. But each month, I feature VIP mentors who are leaders in their industry, and they say that's not true. They're going to prove to you that you don't have to have highbrow connections to create your own personal best. And they've agreed to share their tips, their secrets, and their career advice with you. This is Rising Tide.
Let me bring in one of my favorite people on the planet, and I know that because I worked with him at MSNBC, Mr. Lester Holt. He's the anchor and managing editor of NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt and the host of Dateline NBC. He's been named the most trusted television news personality in America. He's been with NBC since the year 2000, which was the same time I arrived. And he's been in the business for 4 decades, so he knows a thing or two. His work has taken him around the world. He was at WBBM in Chicago as well for 14 years. He began his TV career at WCBS in New York. His awards would take me the entire half hour to list, so I can't do that, but they're all the top ones. And in just a matter of hours, he's about to be inducted into NAB's Broadcasting Hall of Fame, which is fantastic in its own right.
Thank you.
I know Lester as my co-anchor from Newsfront, which was a million years ago on MSNBC, but you really are the ideal person to ask questions of, because you really do know so many aspects of the business. So let me just get right to it.
Absolutely.
How does that sound? And by the way, I should say that the questions for Lester started coming in a couple weeks ago, which is faster and more furious than usually we get any questions, and they were also 6 times the volume. So clearly people are very interested in you, Lester. All right, Jackson Gosnell from Greenville, South Carolina wants to know, what advice would you give to someone who wants to be where you are and have such an incredible job?
I think my advice to somebody who wants to be where I am is to focus right now on what you're doing. Focus on your craft where you are. As you prepare yourself, doors will swing open, as I found in my career at various points. You want to be ready to walk through those jobs and those doors of opportunity. And part of that is not so much focus on the next job, focus on the one you have, and to, make your mark, make your mistakes, find those mentors, and then naturally you'll be ready, because there will be further opportunities. I always say, and I think most of you know this, that hardest job is the hardest, or the first job is the hardest one. And so, focus again on where you are, and that'll take you to where you want to be.
So 3 different people asked a variation of the same question, so I'm going to kind of group all 3 of them. Gabby Medecki from San Francisco asks, what do you wish you knew when you started your career? Liz Jasson from Chicago asks, what lessons do you bring from your early career days to your role as NBC Nightly News anchor? And Elena Casino from Lansing says, what are the things that you wish you'd known when you first started? So it's sort of a combination of...
Okay, sure. I think one of the things that I wish I'd known when I first started is how hard change is, and I'll explain. So you get a good mentor, or you find a news director, that you're one of the go-to people, and you're part of the team, and everything's going great, and they move on, or the company gets sold. There are different priorities, and I found that very hard to adapt to. It was kind of stunning. You feel like the rug is pulled out from under you because you've worked with this great team. The news director, knows you're one of his go-to people. So it's really important, I think, if I look back now, I wish I'd had a bit of a thicker skin there and understand that, hey, change is going to happen. New news director, new priorities. We're going to do things this way, and figure out how to get on the bus early. There were some times I remember struggling with that, like, almost in a resistant mode of, that's not the way we do it. And that's part of being young and immature. So fortunately, I got past that phase.
There's also the notion that sometimes when you're talent, your fortunes will rise and fall with those who are in control, and when they shift out, I think there was an old expression, someone is your rabbi. And
Yeah.
if that rabbi leaves, it's worrisome.
As like I said, you feel like the rug's been pulled out from you. Now, regard to the question about my experiences at WBBM in Chicago, when I had a kind of a backwards career. I started in New York and then went to LA and New York and then finally Chicago. Chicago, then and now, is one of the finest local news towns in the country. And one of the things I learned there was, and everywhere I'd been prior, the anchors, the main anchors, typically would come in, help write the newscast, get the newscast on the air. But in Chicago, there was a real value on being a reporter, which I was reminded at the time is the highest calling of our business, not just reading the news, but a true reporter. And there were some great examples, people like Bill Curtis, that I worked with in Chicago, who, went out, anchored their newscasts, but they also were out almost every day reporting stories. And that was a really important experience for me and something that I've done throughout my career, that, it's not enough to anchor the news. You have to really remind people that you're reporting the news. You're telling these stories that you know intimately because you're part of covering them.
Okay, Chris from Atlanta asks a combination question. Is there something unusual or unique that prepared you for your career? Is there something that every aspiring journalist fails and forgets to do? And is there a skill and talent that you have that other people in your position do not? And is there something that other anchors are great at that's a struggle for you? That's a lot of questions all in one, Chris.
That's a lot of questions. Which shall I take first? Are there other things other anchors do? Sure. I gave this advice recently to someone who was coming up in the business. I said, watch television not only with a critical eye, but figure out what you like and who you like. So you're watching a broadcaster, and for some reason, she or he really connects with you. They're great communicators. Figure it out, study them, and then copy them. That's essentially what I did. And get enough people, and it formed into this, Lester Holt on-air persona. So that's, I think, really important to understand what makes people great communicators and makes them effective. So yeah, I think there are people that are better interviewers than me. I'm sure in all manner of what we do. But I always try to keep my focus. I'm hard on myself, not in a brutal sort of way, but every newscast I walk away kind of judging and reviewing my, how it went that night from my perspective. I'm a believer, be better tomorrow than you were today. And then that keeps it fresh.
Do you have a special sauce, though? There's something about you that you knew and you honed and you realized this is excellence if I just work at it?
I think it came from a family, you just work harder, good things will come to you. Well, it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes things come in different ways. But I think I put this is weird talking about myself in this way, but there's a real value in being nice to people. There's a real value in try to bring camaraderie to the news organization, and respecting not only those you work with, certainly your audience, but those you cover as well. That you can sit down with someone whose thoughts may be inflammatory or maybe offensive to some people, but give them that moment of respect to hear them out, to challenge them. And I think that's something I've tried to do. Others will judge whether I've done it well or not, but I really think it's important to treat people well and with respect across the board. I think it makes us better journalists.
Well, I can attest that you do that because I was there and I saw it firsthand. Ryan Garza from Corpus Christi asks, can you tell us how you got the nickname Lightning Bolt Holt?
I don't know. I've heard that. I've heard variations. Lightning Bolt Holt, Iron Pants Holt. I know that came from when you and I were at MSNBC. We were there during an incredibly busy news period, as you know. We had the 2000 election recount. We had
9/11, right?
9/11, and then the invasion of Afghanistan, the invasion of Iraq. So those were very busy periods. I forgot the point I was going to make, but what was the question?
Lightning Bolt Holt.
Oh, Lightning Bolt. So somewhere the Iron Pants came there because I could spend hours in the anchor chair and not have to go to the bathroom. I'm in my 60s now, that ain't happening, but in the spirit, I'm in the anchor disc for long periods of time. And then I had another one when I was in radio. I started at one of my early jobs was at KCBS News Radio in San Francisco, and they had a promo, Lester Holt, the fastest mic in the West. And I think all of them are related to the fact that I loved and I still love breaking news. There's nothing more exciting than being on the scene of something unfolding and try to impart the information, or being in the anchor chair when something is happening and you're trying to make sense of it for your audience. So I think that's where those nicknames came from.
They're good, no matter what. You're lucky. I think I got Smash. That was my
Smash?
nickname. Well, Ash, Smash. And it
Oh,
doesn't
okay.
sound good.
All right.
Sounds like a drunk, Okay, Monica Madden from Austin, Texas. I like this one because it dovetails off of what you said earlier. Even when you're interviewing, perhaps world leaders that whose thoughts perhaps don't align with ours, and imparting the respect. This is a bit of that. You've interviewed extremely high-profile leaders across the world who often require fact-checking in real time. How do you decide when to interject, when to let them speak, especially in a live setting like a presidential debate with millions of Americans watching?
That's a really, really good
Really
question. We're in a period right now where I think we're used to smash mouth everything, politics and journalism, and the louder and the more aggressive, the better. I don't kind of roll that way. I believe our job is to bring people out, let them expose themselves for whatever they are. But it's challenging in that environment, because a lot of folks would rather you just beat someone up or club them over the head verbally with your questions. But I think if you give, restrain, give people, some people say give rope, whatever it is, give them space, and they will reveal themselves. There was a mention of the debate there, I think.
Presidential debate, if you have to fact check in real time.
Oh, the fact check in real time. That's one you have to do, in the moment, and it's hard because a lot of folks understand that sometimes when you're interviewing a high-profile person, a president, maybe a CEO, you're given a limited amount of time. They're saying you've got 10 minutes, you've got 15 minutes, and you've got to sit there and play mental gymnastics while you're doing the interview. That I just asked them a really good question. They totally didn't answer the question. So do I spend time and go another 2 or 3 questions and still get no answer, or do I move on to topic A? And that is, that's very challenging. But when it comes to making the call about fact checking, you try to, you just try to feel it as you go along. You don't want to become the debater. It's one thing to be a debate host, another thing to become, suddenly in an adversarial relationship. But you try to watch the big ones, the wild ones that are patently untrue, or maybe something was important was left out, just as a way to acknowledge to the audience that yes, we know. I'm trying to hear I'm not doing a good job. I try to hear the voices at home that people are watching. What are they saying? What are they yelling at the TV? Come on, Lester, ask him that, or what about that?
But what's stressful is that half of them are saying, come on, Lester, go after them, and half of them are saying, ease up, Lester.
Yeah.
And that's what's harder and harder
That's a good
now.
point, because you can, and I've seen this happen, you can suddenly, audience can suddenly find sympathy for the person you're interviewing, because if you're too hard, and so that's a little of the gymnastics that take place. But
and the political dynamics that kick in as well.
Yeah,
you can't please everyone.
Yeah, and you talk about what you knew then, and I mean, certainly we didn't get emails or tweets or that sort of thing back then. But it is one of the hardest things we do.
So Chris from Chicago says, I've been lucky enough to watch you from your days at WBBM. Your tone and your approach always seem to fit well with what people want. Honest, neutral, sincere. To me, you've always stood out as an anchor. Is there a way for a journalist today, considering the polarization and the attacks against the media, to have a tone and delivery that wins over more viewers over who would otherwise turn away? Can you share and critique your approach in this regard?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of talked about that a little bit. I mean, but yes, I think what you give is what you get to a certain extent. If I come at you on all fours, Ashley, but I know in fact you did, you're going to come back that way. It's great television. It's not always the most informative television, however, when it becomes, I always try to remember that, and we get caught up in this, I get caught up in this, that we find ourselves doing this for our peers. We want our peers in the business to, wow, that was great. And I try to constantly remind myself, I'm here for the viewer, to talk to this person, to get as much information as we can for the viewer. And it's really easy to fall into this sense of, we want to be, lauded by our peers, and way to go, Lester.
Or not attacked by them. I think that's one of the most valuable things I could have learned early. Where were you to tell me this 25 years ago? I think I always worried what the media critics would say, rather than what would someone in Peoria say.
Yeah, because in the division we have in the country right now, it extends to media. As you know, you can find a channel that will support whatever position you want to take, but a lot of it now is geared toward attacking each other in some cases. And so you're right. Sometimes I do hear in the back of my mind, okay, how's that gonna, what's that gonna sound like in primetime cable tonight?
Right.
But you can't, but I that happens, and then I tell myself, no, we don't play that way. And again, if I keep my focus on the viewer, then those things don't really become an issue.
It's an excellent piece of advice. Thank you for the question, Chris from Chicago. Shane Gustafson from Chicago as well asks, you've been named the most trusted news personality in America, which is not an easy task. It's harder and harder. How have you been able to gain the trust of the public, especially those who don't think that mainstream media is telling the truth?
Yeah, I mean, there was a poll about the most trusted person, and I'll take it. It was nice. But I think you just treat them with respect. Don't talk down to the audience. And I think your work ultimately speaks for itself. When you do a story, people get upset sometimes if the story doesn't necessarily agree with their worldview, but at some point, you hope they will get past it and realize, I'm reporting the story. I'm not talking about how I feel, and which is not to say that. I always remind people we're human. I have thoughts about. Trust me, every issue I talk about in nightly news, I have personal thoughts about it. But so what? Because that's not what I'm there for. But I am a human being. But I think you just have to be really consistent and honest. And also, one of the things I learned along the way is correct yourself immediately on the air. I won't share which one, but I remember saying a couple of things on the air and hoping they would blow past it. No one heard it. Well, of course they heard it.
Yeah, of course they do.
And so I did learn that when you say something, it's okay. That's not exactly what I meant. Let me clarify. And that gets you past it. Yeah. But if you try to bull your way past it, you're going to get the tweets and the letters, and you're like, darn, I should have dealt with it at that moment.
This is a little more superficial than that, but back in the mid-'90s, I remember at a station I worked in, the female anchor at 11 o'clock at night, in the 80s, the earrings were huge. Her earring fell off and hit the anchor desk while she was on a single shot. And I immediately thought, oh, she's going to make a joke of it. But her instincts from old training was pretend it never happened, right. Keep going forward, the show must go on. And I made a conscious decision at that time that wasn't fair, because she was trying to put one over on me. I'm not maligning her.
Right.
It was just old training. And I think the best thing to do would have been to pick it up and say, well, that's embarrassing. Let's continue, And then the viewer feels like they're a part of what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, they realize stuff happens. I mean, listen, I was anchoring from home for a year during the height of the pandemic. Some nights it was a miracle we got on the air, technically, but, thanks to our folks, we did it. But
with a little help from your dog barking?
Yeah, I think, there was, there might have been a dog barking a time or two, but I think that was kind of endearing to a lot of folks. Everybody was in the same boat and realized that things weren't as smooth as we'd become accustomed.
It's endearing, I think. Gina from Chicago says, you have a son who is also in the business, Stefan. Is there any reason you did or didn't want him to follow in your footsteps?
Yeah, you're referring to my older son, Stefan. He anchors the early and late news in Chicago at the NBC station. I always wanted my kids to just be successful and do well at whatever they do, and he chose broadcasting. He loved following me around. Back in the days, I would do Weekend Today. High schooler would get up at 4 a.m. and come to work with me sometimes and just hang around the studios and watch. And it kind of reminded me, because a lot of my early build up to my career was hanging around radio stations and just kind of observing and talking to people. So I knew that he had that bent. He went to school to study political science, but it turned into TV, and so I'm very proud of what he does. But that was he was exposed to it certainly. What I think was really important, he was exposed to some of the downsides of this business, and that is certainly what it does to personal life. You've been there. I mean, when the bell rings, you're expected to go, and sometimes at not a really convenient time. But it's, in this case, he knew what he was getting into.
And did you ever worry? Did you ever secretly hope he would change his mind or at any point? Or were you thrilled?
No. I'm incredibly proud of what we do. I think this is, it's an incredibly important profession, and sure, we've taken some lumps over the last few years, but we have stood there during some really times that have tested us. Certainly the pandemic. We're covering a war overseas now. But these are important moments in history. And people need a independent and fair-minded and aggressive institutions of journalism to take us through these times. So I'm proud he's doing it, and I'm still very proud of what I do.
He's really good at it too, that's for sure. David from Miami, Florida asks, it's the same question. I'm going to move on. He asks about Stefan as well. Assuming he had your full support from the beginning, but I think you've answered that. So Jessica from Chicago says, out of all your legendary interviews, was there one that you were most terrified to interview?
Yeah, I don't know if I want to share it, though. Some people just have personas. No one's ever terrified me, but I don't know if I want to go there.
I have a feeling I know.
Yeah, but I've spoken to leaders who are unpredictable and leave you in a situation that you talked about earlier. How are you going to be judged by other media? And again, you don't want to do that, but it's in the back of your mind. But I will say there are certainly are people who have given me pause, and you're sitting there trying to write the questions, and then you have to write all the what the answers, what you think the answers are going to be, where it might twist and turn. But listen, it's part of the job.
Part of the job. Christopher
that was a
from
political
Atlanta.
answer I've ever heard one, man.
I'll give you this one. My one that I was terrified of doing was Yasser Arafat, but not because of him. I was more afraid of the Israeli tanks that were trained on the compound and scrambling up over the bricks and mortar and everything that had fallen to get in. So some of those interviews aren't necessarily for the editorial. It's for the circumstance and then getting out. So everybody.
Yeah, I did one in Northern Ireland once. I was interviewing a high leader in Sinn Féin, and like an idiot, we were going to a place to the interview, and I said, "Yeah, you want to ride with us?" This guy had several attempts on his life, and my crew looked at me like,
"Bad car, bad car."
Bad idea. I'm like, "Would you mind taking the Uber?" No, this was pre-Uber, but yeah.
It's true, and I think about all of our colleagues right now who are crisscrossing Ukraine to get, these live shots. And if you look at where they are and where they've come from, you realize that they have traveled open road.
Yeah.
And that is the most dangerous part of the job, is just getting through those checkpoints. So just remember to laud them and applaud when you see them. This is another good one from Christopher from Atlanta. Says, how do you keep from getting too comfortable? How do you stay interested and hungry? And how do you keep the quality high?
That's a really good question. We're at what we do at 6:30 every night Eastern time. It's a very, very competitive field. It's kind of the flagship newscast of NBC News. We have a lot of resources. We have a lot of depth, and we take risks sometimes. It's 30 minutes of programming that you see. It's 20 some odd minutes of actual content. And so it naturally keeps you energized, and that you've got to, every day, with this blank canvas, we sit down and figure out how to fill it with the right stories and the right placement, touching the things that we think that people need to know, that they want to know, and that just gets you energized. The planning starts almost right after the end of the newscast about the next day and how we'll respond. Where should we travel? Do we need to move more resources there? I haven't gotten bored yet, and we are in a period. I say this all the time. There used to be periods that we had slow news days. You just come in like, oh man,
when was that?
We're going to lead with a dog wedding tonight or something. I don't know. And now the world is. I don't know if the world is changing or there's just more content, video available out there. But for whatever the reason, we're just going 90 miles an hour all the time.
There's certainly a lot more content to react to. There's more conversation in the ether, and therefore there's more response to it and more conflict. So it does seem as though we can never really cover it all.
Yeah, there's not enough time sometimes.
Jessica from Chicago asks, how have you stayed motivated in times throughout your career when things didn't go your way, like being let go or being passed up on a promotion? Because a lot of us have that happen.
That's a really good question, and it kind of dovetails with what I said earlier. Things will change, the environment will change, and wherever you're working, and you can feel kind of let down. I have seen, along my career, people who, got something that I thought that maybe I deserved at the time. And again, a lot of that was a product of immaturity. But I remember I was passed over for a network position years ago that I thought was going to be good for me, and someone said, "Look, you're not ready, and you just need to work harder, and you need to, and it sounds very trite, but it's hard to do. You got to check your ego, and then then you look back in your work a year earlier, and wow, I've gotten better. I am more seasoned. So, the biggest advice I give to folks is to blow into a bottle on a microphone. No, I think the biggest advice is be patient. And I know that sounds, you don't want to hear that when you're 22 years old, 23 years old, and you're trying to get that first job. But you do have to be patient. And I'll go back to what I said, really, try to figure out where you're at and do well there, and then make those incremental steps. But it's not going to happen overnight, and there are going to be those moments you think that, hey, I got screwed over. And we're all driven by egos, but people in television are really driven by egos. And little secret, we're all a little bit insecure on some level.
A lot.
Yeah, a lot. It's just, you're putting yourself out there every day in front of this camera, and you're taking a big risk. And by the way, it can be very subjective. When I worked in local news, it was a saying, when the ratings were down, you change the set, then you change the graphics, then you change the anchors. So things happen. And I think, looking back, what should I have known there is that you need patience, and that I'm still a believer that if you work hard and you improve and you show this talent, then you'll be ready when the next door of opportunity opens.
I only have a little over a minute left, but I had this isn't on the list, but I had a conversation with someone who shall remain nameless. She's in her 20s, and she felt that she had to leave her program in college because she wanted to look after her mental health and practice a lot of self-care. And I had a tough time responding because I felt like that was never part of the conversation when we were coming up through the business. I felt like we were told, just pull up your bootstraps and nose to the grindstone and make it work, And how would you counsel someone today? Because a lot of the young people today are putting their personal well-being sometimes in advance of the hard work that it takes to get to the position that you're in.
Yeah, it's incredibly tough. Work-life balance is a problem, of course, in every industry, but I think, looking back in my career, I think sometimes I worked too hard. Without going into the whole story, when I was in Chicago, I left there, after I was demoted, and it kind of knocked me back on my heels, and I lost a lot of confidence. I was 2 weeks of unemployment before NBC found me a place to work. And it left me feeling kind of vulnerable, and I worked like a madman, and a lot of it was just trying to be, am I not good enough? And it was kind of a hard period. So I know it sounds weird to look back. I don't think I worked too hard, but I think I was a little manic at some point. And now I'm at it was a wonderful point in my career. I anchor the flagship broadcast of the network every day, and get the respect of a lot of people. A lot of, it's fun. You talk about feedback. I like the feedback I like that real honest feedback when someone will stop you, not just to say, hey, I watch you, but really to say, hey, I really watch you, and I love when you do that, or I like that part of your newscast. It tells me that they're watching. And that's the stuff, that's the reward that really sticks with you.
Yeah, the person who stops you on the street and says, I watch you every morning.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Or I still get occasionally, hey, Brian Gumbel. Like, no,
right.
That's that guy. Love him, but I'm not that guy.
Thanks, anyway. Lester, there couldn't be anybody more deserving of the position that you're in, not just because I love you to pieces, but also because you're just a really wonderful journalist and an even better person.
Well, let me just briefly say, when I speak about Ashley Banfield, including today, I always say he's one of the most talented broadcasters I've ever worked for. Smart, tremendous interview, telegenic, the whole package. And what thrills of my career was working with you. And I'm glad you're sharing this kind of information because, there wasn't a lot of this for many of us coming up of a certain generation. It's a competitive business. It's changed a lot, but the root of what we do is still trying to inform people every day in the best way we know how.
And help the young people know that it's a really noble craft, and let's keep it pristine and lovely and for many generations to come. Thank you.
Don't forget, you can watch me every night on NewsNation at 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 Central, and 7 p.m. on the West Coast. Don't know where to watch us? Just go to www.joinnn.com. Enter your zip code, and the channel finder will show you where you can find us on your broadcast dial. But don't forget, we're also on all the streamers: Hulu, Roku, YouTube TV. This is Ashley Banfield, and thanks so much for joining me for this edition of Rising Tide.